Hello, hello.
Hey.
We are here again. This is Biweeklycast, episode number 49. And today we're going to be talking about strategies, I guess, sort of, kind of.
And I wonder how you managed to make every episode number sound like a question.
I don't know. No, I don't. I have no answer to that. I think maybe an explanation could be that I'm looking at the number here in our notes and I'm trying to read it, and maybe in the back of my mind I'm afraid of misreading it. Like when I was a child, I was so anxious about confusing 11 and 12, so I had to count 10, 11, 12, and then figure out what I'm about to say. Here I'm, I guess, a little bit afraid of misspeaking the number, so I try to take it gently, and the intonation turns into a question. Like, I think that would be my theory.
All right. Some unintended external feedback. Your numbers are fine.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I've heard you.
So before we get to the actual discussion, there is a theme corner coming. And my two themes that are currently ongoing are Year of Clarity and Fall of Nucleus. I'm missing out the triennial because it's global and hasn't changed or progressed much. And in terms of Year of Clarity, things are actually getting quite more clear than they used to be. And I think Fall of Nucleus was a very good season. The only thing that I brutally misinterpreted how it's going to go. Like, I thought that I will just make an audit of all my activities, decide what I'm going to give up, and slowly give them up. Well, I did give up a number of things, but not the way I intended. There was a lot of Russian issues and things. And like, for instance, I don't manage Savvy products anymore. Like all our services have their own managers now, and I don't even manage these managers. So my entire influence area in Savvy has changed. And right now I focus specifically on strategic sessions as a service that is my service and business development, like just two areas, and that's it. And I'm happy that it happened, but the way it happened was kind of stressful. Not the way I pictured it. But generally, I think that the Fall of Nucleus is going in the work-related context quite well. And
that's interesting. May I ask a question there? Because when you said brutally, it kind of to me has a little bit of a negative connotation, but I'm really happy to hear that in the end you were happy with the end result of that. And if I may ask, what kind of brutality was there? Was it that it just went in a way that you did not exactly expect or plan, or was there something abrupt that you had to respond to, but in the end it's amounted to the thing that you wanted?
Pictured it as a very smooth transition. I would map everything out, estimate it, make a decision, talk to people, transition very slowly and carefully. Well, I didn't go that way. Like, I didn't make an audit. I just intuitively felt that, all right, like this is something I should give up because I had a COO coming on board. One of our managers was promoting to a C-level position, and it was time to make a job description. And it's not that I had these few weeks that I could take to consider what exactly I wanted to give up. So I just gave up what seemed right. And it's not the level of consideration that I intended to give. Then the entire process of giving away the projects, like you would picture that you would have a few one-to-ones, meaningfully talk to people how it's going to work, decide on the key responsibilities, reporting, and other things. Well, none of that has happened. At the end, I don't manage these projects, and I think they will be managed well, but the way I pictured it and the way it actually happened, the number of stress, misunderstanding, and hiccups that happened in the process were quite stressful. Like, I'm happy now at the very end, but the amount of things like, no, it's her job, and your job is to make her job easier, and I'm not part of this equation anymore. Like, and the number of such transactions in the past few months was just sky high.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
But then, like I said, I'm glad that it worked out in the end.
yeah, like I'm happy with the final outcome. It's the danger of themes. Like you never know how you'll get there. Here we are. But eventually I can quite easily picture how I'm going to get more free time starting from January. And I even know how I'm going to spend it, getting deeper into the domains and areas where I should focus, like BizDev and strategy in terms of Savvy, philosophy in terms of Aspen and some other areas. And that's it. Like I don't have a list of 10 projects on my mind. Like I even limited the social activities, which I couldn't do for the past few years. And I put a limitation on how many hours a month I spend for some impact or social events. Crazy.
Stuff.
Yeah. So basically, it's kind of overlapping, the year of clarity and this fall of nucleus, which was the first stage. I'm still wondering what's winter going to be about, but I think I still have a week.
Yeah, winter is like tomorrow, no? I'm sorry to break it for you, but
Maybe not
I
a week.
thought you should
A
know.
weekend, though. I do have a weekend.
All right. Yeah, yeah. As the old saying goes, at least for software developers, a weekend is an infinite amount of.
Exactly.
That's why you put deadlines on Monday.
So that's pretty much it about the themes.
That could. And I'm super intrigued by what you put in the topic. You say I've had 6 strategic sessions in past 7 weeks. It's mind blowing a little bit.
Yeah. And it's not that I actually do much to advertise this service. It's just the word of mouth and people. I think it's related to my other podcast, The Stratosphere,
Mm-hmm.
and some activities around. Like I was a bit more public about things I'm doing. Not that public, like I don't advertise things, but still.
I think you should, like, for those uninitiated listeners in our audience, would you mind telling a little bit about your other podcast, Stratosphere?
Yeah, it's a Ukrainian spoken podcast about strategy where I interview facilitators and business people one after the other, trying to simplify and explain that strategy is not the rocket science that you can only learn in business schools, but it's everyday important decisions and choices that you make that have long-term impact. And it could be a napkin strategy, it could be a big business canvas, and we try to map all the different styles and examples of what it might look like.
As always, the link to the podcast would be in our show notes.
Yep. And speaking of the inspiration that this podcast brought some clients that order strategic sessions, and wait for it, like they've ordered 12 strategic sessions in the past, like within 4 months. And I assume that it's going to get way slower and more passive starting from February, because everybody needs a strategic session in between October and December. Like that's some kind of a curse. And it doesn't make much sense to me, because most of those sessions are not yearly planning sessions. They are different kinds of. We can start with the definitions first, because when people come and they say we need a strategic session, it usually means we want to get our managers together and talk. What they would like to talk about is usually a very different thing. Somebody needs a mission statement. Somebody wants to discuss values. Somebody needs strategic vision. Somebody works on the goals, yearly goals or longer goals. Somebody wants to speak about priorities. Somebody wants to pivot a product. Somebody thinks about alternative markets. Like there are a number of topics, and all of them are named as strategic sessions, because when you get strategic people in one room, you get a strategic session, which I personally disagree. But since clients use this term anyway, like it's really hard to fight, because it's already a collocation that is common in Ukrainian business, and people just use it for everything. Like the word coach. Like anyone could be a coach as long as you just name yourself a coach. Yes, there are some certifications and
As long
skills
as
and
you
everything, but
can answer a question, you can consider yourself a coach.
yeah, like I'm a strategy coach. Like I just decide so. And I think with strategic sessions, it works in a similar way. Like there's no clear definition, like this is a strategic session and this is not. Companies try to define them, but who cares, because customers still don't use this term.
Yeah, I think that this is super interesting. I think that there is this element to this whole topic that people would want to do a song and dance of strategic something, but then even it's not to say like the meaning of that is not there, but even sometimes the form of what one would classically or traditionally consider a strategic session, even that is not there. And then the question is like, oh, what this is really about, which is interesting. What this is really about, what people do in those quote unquote strategic sessions that you facilitate.
You see, that's since it's a group thing, people come there with different needs and expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Some people advocate for strategic sessions just to be heard because people don't listen to them in any other circumstances. Unless they get a facilitator in the room who will say everybody has 4 minutes answering this question, and then this person finally has 4 minutes to speak up. And I mean, that's okay, but doesn't always sound like a strategic session because people use this time to advocate some of their ideas, complain about some things that they are worried about, which is probably good. I mean, it's good part of the dialogue and the conversation within the team. It's culture shaping, but not necessarily resolving a big strategic choice for the team on what kind of value they're going to create and how they're going to transform their activities and what are the priorities.
This is super interesting. I think this kind of connects to that other thought, like in entirely unrelated context that I had, that like whenever there is a process and people are involved in it and they have some grievances or objections or whatever it might be, even if the process itself does not assume or provide any means to share those grievances or objections, they nonetheless will find a way to voice them. And that may happen in not entirely productive ways or situations. And by not productive, I don't mean like disruptive or something. It's just it happens in a way that's not helpful. You cannot derive value from people sharing those grievances, like as if they are just writing on the fence that I'm so unhappy, and it feels like something similar, at least partially, that there might be this dynamics involved there.
It certainly does. And I think in a similar way, people who put a lot of different expectations somehow agreed that all these strategic sessions should happen in between October and December. And I could potentially imagine that it comes from some historic predisposition of the way the management was 30 years ago or something, when you would go for smart goals on a yearly basis, review them. And I think it kind of built up a habit that you have to do yearly planning in November to schedule and plan and budget everything and then leave all year through without any serious reasons why it couldn't be happening in July or March or any other term, except for maybe financial reports. But nobody looks at financial reports during the strategic sessions. Like, people look at the managerial reports and some key numbers, but not the entire papers or charts. Moreover, in the current reality, people review their business goals like every 3 months. It's not that you plan something and then it's this goal for a year. Like, if something changes, you will still come together for a revision and calibrate the session over, which makes even less sense putting all the main decisions in December when everyone is in a hurry. The holidays are coming. You have to do a number of reports. And then on top of that, you have to do a yearly planning. And basically, you stop all the productive work just to do this thing. And then you're so tired and exhausted by the end of the process that you just hope for the next 9 months not to get back to it ever.
Right, and I think it has two kind of harmful things associated with this. One, like you was by the end of the actual kind of process of strategizing, for the lack of a better word, one can be so fatigued and tired, so they would accept anything just for this thing to be over, which is not great. You supposedly are making the most maybe impactful decisions for your business for the next year, and you definitely don't want to make them in this kind of mind state. And then, like you said, you don't want to hear about this for next 9 months. But to me, this is also one of the often not uncommon problems with this whole approach, is that it's like it's treated like a point in time. We like there is this meeting, everyone comes to this meeting and in 1 hour tries to decide something, often not realizing that in order to make the decision in 1 hour, maybe weeks, if not months of prior work needed to be put in to come up with possible options and evaluate trade-offs and so on and so forth. And yeah, if you don't want to hear about this until the next November, it means that you are not doing that prep work, which means that strategy session is going to be kind of awkward and you are going to be tired by the end of it and make bad decisions.
And I think this is a good place to bring in another definition, because you used quote unquote strategizing as a term here. And I think it's a decent term to use. And even the way you explained it, yes, I can feel your pain, because that's basically what I've been facing for the past few months, and I will probably face it for another one. But when I think about the process of strategy development or strategizing, it includes a number of things. And firstly, it would be analytics, yeah, like getting the insights from the market, from the clients, from the product teams, and processing all this stuff. Can it be useful if it's done once a year? Yes, it can. Should it be done more often on a regular basis, collecting small pieces of feedback and then just putting them to a bigger report by the end of the year? Yes, please. Like, do analytics on a regular basis and just crystallize the outcomes and the intermediate insights that you have had, I don't know, quarterly, monthly, into a bigger report before the strategic session. Firstly, it's easier. Secondly, you might learn something useful way before it becomes a problem.
Right.
So the first section of this strategic development thing, analytics, I think should be a yearly thing. And for some people it is, but generally, I think when we speak about analytics, we usually consider some KPIs or these kind of things, and we don't do like basic strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, external trends and tendencies, technological shifts, even the tendencies within our customer behavior. Like, has anything been fluctuating in the past few months? And most people collect this data, they just don't consider it useful, or they don't communicate it frequently enough. And I think that's an issue that it's just a matter of habit. People collect this data, they just don't think about it, don't talk about it on a regular basis, which is a problem.
I wonder if there might be an element that people are not using this data because they're doing different. They're actually doing different thing than what they think that they're doing. And here I would want to ask you a couple of questions about what kind of decisions are people trying to make in those strategic sessions. And kind of my context for that would be that I totally understand that the way things are in Ukraine, that it's definitely not by any stretch of imagination, not a normal situation, not a normal business environment, which prompts for maybe shorter term, more reactive kind of planning. But all things being equal, me strategy or kind of change of strategy does not happen or should not happen every year. To me, like strategy is something slightly more longer term, and like the yearly planning session, by all means, let's do that. We see how we progress towards our strategic vision in the next year. This is how we are going there. But then for something like this, different data, different analytics might be required. And if you are coming with analytics that like super strategic, super long term, I can see how it can be disregarded if you're in fact doing a yearly planning kind of setup. So circling back to my question, like what kind of decisions do people try to make in those sessions that you facilitate?
I'll just give you a few examples. Like a company made an experiment of getting to the EU market, which seems unsuccessful, and they have to decide whether they're going to back up or keep going with this thing, like, or maybe change the market or change the way they're dealing with this market, or just say like, no, that was not a successful thing. Let's just round up and get back to Ukrainian operations. Another thing is people who were doing a project for a specific audience, let's say teenagers in Ukraine, are rapidly losing customers for a number of reasons, and they should decide what they're going to do with their product in the perspective of 5 years. What's going to be the value? Who they're going to be working with, considering that their target audience is shrinking. How they're going to succeed? Like, would they shrink together, like proportionally? Would they switch to a different audience? Would they provide another more expensive product, considering that the number of people is fewer, but maybe they could get more from them by providing a different value? And this is the kind of decision they would like to make. Another example would be companies that currently have the unprecedented number of resources. Let's say it's a green energy solar panel manufacturer and engineering company. They understand that like this is their window of opportunity. They get extra sales. They have queued up clients for the next half a year, and they basically like get X10 from what they were doing before. But they understand that this is a temporary thing. Like it's not going to last forever. It's going to last for the next 2 years, 3 years maybe. And then it's going to drop back to some kind of normal. And while they still have this resource in common, how are they going to use it? Like, are they going to invest it somewhere? Are they going to expand? What's the strategy here of how they're going to use this temporary window of opportunity, and what should be their focus for this time period?
Interesting.
Yeah, just a few examples, but from very different industries.
But they're also so different, but still so similar. I'm trying to pinpoint it. The difference is sort of obvious, right? Some are talking about the contractions in the market, some are talking about opportunities and so on. So the difference is definitely there. But I think what's in common between them to me is that, at least the way you frame it, is there are very relatively specific questions that people are trying to answer, which would not exactly match my definition or kind of vision for how a strategy talks happen, but that's fine. This is still interesting and illuminating.
Because in this specific case, it's really hard for them to go with a classical approach where they define a vision together and then they build the ways how they're going to get there. Normally, when you look at the environment and you label a number of things outside and inside that could potentially benefit or block you from doing what you intend to do, we ask people to put some grades where on scale from 1 to 7, where 1 is just important, 3 is important for all people in the company, and 7 is something that could potentially ruin your business at all, or something that on the opposite side could be the core of your business. And the number of external factors with 6 and 7 has grown drastically for Ukrainian businesses. And that's why they're kind of reactive to what's happening outside way more than what is their choice, because their choices are not as impactful as their reaction to some external trends and tendencies around them. As an example, people could be willing to grow and expand and they know how to do it, but then the mobilization age changes and part of their people could be conscripted to the army and they just can't get the resource necessary to do that. And there is no way, like, you could be creative and try to minimize the risks, but it in no way prevents them completely, and you can't be planning something for a period of 2 or 3 years without considering this factor. That's why it seems more situational than orthodox strategy.
Right. And then the question we have, what do you think is the value that people are trying, that's number one, and actually getting out of hiring in external consultants like yourself to facilitate the session. So I can relatively easily see that, like, why don't the managers of that company get together in one room, go on off-site or something to think through that. That's
I would say
what do you
that
think they want to get from external inputs or facilitation?
it's usually about the focus on the specific goal of this meeting. And quite often people who are part of the process, they tend to advocate for their section of the conversation. They would like to highlight some things that they find important. And it's hard for them to be a person who gives space for others, but still representing their position and their interests equally. Like, this is what I face whenever I facilitate strategic sessions in Savvy. Like, I just don't feel that I am assertive enough about my needs, issues, and problems and things that I would like to escalate, because I'm responsible for the space and letting other people talk. And when you get somebody who comes from the outside, this person can be basically more fair in terms of representing the time, seeing which discussions are going off track and which are actually getting us towards the goal. And some companies just don't have the practice of dialogue. They can't listen to each other for longer than 5 minutes without interruptions. And facilitators can bring in some rules that are not typical for this team, but within these rules, they can listen to each other more and therefore agree better or discuss something more difficult than they probably wouldn't if they didn't have anyone from the outside who is not engaged in the emotions and who doesn't risk with them.
If I can probe into this a little bit more, and if you are wondering why you were not hearing me, that was because I was muted.
That makes sense.
I don't know if our listeners need to know that, but now they know. Yeah, I wanted to avoid some background noise from getting in and forget to unmute myself. So if you don't mind me probing into this a little bit more, so we're probably looking at the kind of culture situation with the company. So like you're saying that they don't have a culture of habit of being inclusive and allowing other voices and hearing them, which is not great, I guess. But it's great that they're trying to fix this with the strategic session. How I would then extrapolate this whole thing would be that if they don't have a habit of listening to other people, they probably don't have a habit of responding or changing decisions in response to those other voices. So there would be, like, for the lack of a better word, kind of authoritarian kind of an approach where, like, there's CEO, whoever it might be, who just does his thing and doesn't listen to others, which to me begs the question, all right, we had a strategic session, we let those voices be heard, like to what extent, like if they're out of that room, would their CEO, whoever it might be, still do their old thing, right? Yeah, it was nice, we had a good offsite, we spent a bit of money on that, maybe the cookies and the coffee was nice, I'm back to doing my old thing. Have you observed how that what happens after those sessions?
It depends, because I think that not necessarily people who lack the culture of dialogue are authoritarian. That's certainly a case for many companies.
For sure.
But then you could also consider that, for instance, there could be a CEO and two co-owners who are all three authoritarian in their specific domains, and they have to agree on what is important for the entire system before they can go back to being authoritarian in their domains and areas of influence. Like, let's say one is responsible for the product, somebody is responsible for sales, and somebody is responsible for organizational, like managerial and process kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they do need this space, even within a very authoritarian system, to synchronize, which they probably can't just because they are not used to listening. And here they are forced to listen. And these things do impact their decisions anyway, because they were listening to each other for a day or 2 days, and they get the context that they need. Even if they can't really appreciate it, or they don't know how they got it, or they can't replicate this experience in the meeting room back in their office because of habits, because a number of reasons why they can't. But this experience of just being together and working on a similar issue like something that they have in common, looking at the system from a different angle, not just from their perspective, but from the helicopter view, kind of changes their attitude towards some issues. Some of them are not very rapid, and it would take a few months to digest and change some choices. Some people just get very revolutionary and change things right after the session. It is quite different. But I wanted to highlight that it could also be part of a democratic team, like people who, let's say, make key decisions by consensus, like where most people the majority has to agree about something, but they struggle to find this majority because there are a few fractions or groups that advocate very different strategies or decisions, and they do need a space. And moreover, they have to agree about the criteria of choice, like what exactly are we choosing? How are we going to vote? Like, do we just advocate for people we trust, or we advocate for the ideas that bring more benefits or impact or less risks? Or like, what's the mechanism of decision making that we do? It's like with all the general elections, yeah, like people can just vote for this, for that, or for something else. But when you have 6 options, it's getting more complicated. So even for them, the practice of open conversation and being able to listen to alternative positions before they get to make a choice could still be useful, even in a very horizontal or democratic kind of decision-making system.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I agree with you that I kind of maybe in my portrayal of the situation, I dismissed the fact that even like no matter what happens after, if after people got exposure to some ideas that would one way or the other influence their thinking, it might be the influence might be smaller or greater, but most of the time it still would be there. That's a great point. But then the story that you told us after that kind of plays into my other thinking. What kind of role does the kind of leadership play in how those strategic sessions transpire? It's like the latter part that you describe with democratic companies or teams where every decision is made by a committee sounds like such a dreadful perspective to me. If I can be honest. Like, what are your observations from those strategic sessions, and maybe how different leadership styles play into how things go?
There are alternative approaches depending usually on the needs of the CEO and owners, because sometimes they would like to give up some responsibility, but they can't. Letting people decide what they think is best and then doing that is a very good way to delegate the responsibility. And they just can't do it on a regular basis in real life for a number of reasons. And here they get a chance to like, all right, I'm going to move a bit and we will share this responsibility for this choice, but then we'll have to take the consequences and whatever it brings. So if, for instance, we choose this market together, then we will work on getting to this market, and everyone can play their own part in exploring and then expanding there. And people do get a bit more engaged. And it's kind of harder to do in the just more, let's say, hierarchical systems when there is a manager and the manager of the manager, and everyone knows that the manager will be finally responsible for the final outcome. But in this case, it works a bit like a brainstorming session where you are interested in hearing a number of ideas, but then the filtering of these ideas, when you have this long list of 25 things to do, you have to choose, like, so what are we going to do? And these mechanics could work very differently. On one hand, you could give people, I don't know, 5 votes and ask them to nominate these 5 votes within these options to see which option is the most popular. You could ask them a few questions saying like which of them these options will bring us more profit, or which of these options is more realistic. And it totally changes the way this democracy works. The way you shape the question usually changes the outcomes. But getting back to your initial question about the leadership itself, there are people who take these strategic sessions as advisory session. Like, guys, you just share your expertise and I make the call at the end. And there are people who are just dreaming to give away this responsibility and not doing it anymore. Like people who are so tired of crisis management and micromanagement and making all the hard choices that they actually ask people, like, please, is there anyone in this room who is willing to take the full responsibility for this thing and make this decision and then work on making this decision happen? I think it's a very Ukrainian kind of a thing that we're kind of getting very exhausted and tired as managers and leaders after a number of years of total micromanagement, and they just want to give up while still understanding what's happening and how it's happening.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit to continue discussion because like with all of what you're saying is making quite a lot of sense, but then in my head, like it is similar to how we start looking at one sort of concept, and if you imagine this as a Christmas tree decoration which falls on the floor and then shatters into billion of smaller pieces, like here you were saying, like managers are tired of micromanagement. It's like, well, why are they micromanaging and so on? Like it kind of, there are so many interacting bits and pieces that go into something like that, and I think that this is what makes this a topic overall so fascinating, but also so challenging to talk about, because you need to be constantly refocusing yourself and kind of making sure that we are talking all about the
Yeah, and for me, it's even harder because when you say, let's say, leadership, I can imagine like 6 different leadership styles that I've seen in the past
Right.
half a year, and they kind of all blend in. And it's hard to pick an example because this example could come from different teams and different contexts, and it's kind of hard to operate.
Right. Because even the thing that you said, like, yeah, that there are some leaders or managers, CEOs, who, however we call them, who treat those strategic session as an advisory thing, which I think it to me that immediately splits into a couple of things. One would be that, all right, what would be the motivation of people who are treated like that, right? They supposedly in that brainstorming strategic session, they share their best ideas just to be judged by that leader that anyway decides for himself, where I would think like, oh, it would be so much more helpful if the leader would share his vision upfront before the discussion so that people know where he wants to take the stuff. And it would be even better if people who work with them, trust their vision, and that therefore would be willing to push their best ideas. But then if it doesn't happen, there are some other things that can have, like, it branches so quickly, and we need to be very specific about what we are talking about.
That's one of the examples that just happened to me 2 weeks ago, where an owner of the company, not a company, a group of companies, there were 3, if I'm not mistaken, invited not just the managers from these 3 companies, but also an advisory board members. And he did share his vision, like what kind of business model he sees as in the future, how it should work, how it should operate, who it should work with. And then for the entire day, they were like, maybe for a few hours, they were trying to clarify how they understand it, like what exactly it means, and agree on the main terms. But then 3/4 of the session, they were working on the way how to get there. And it went pretty well, even considering that these advisors were just there to share their thoughts and then leave for a quarter without being totally engaged. They still find the value because, on one hand, you don't get much influence there, but on the other hand, it's quite mental exercise. And this is what I feel when I come to these strategic sessions. Basically, you have to grasp an entire new business and their team and their context and their culture within a few days and see how they operate. So it's basically like a puzzle that you have to solve. And I think that when people with a specific kind of mindset just get a chance to work on such puzzle, it could be by itself quite a motivator. Like, I'm basically asked a question about something that is way beyond my usual area of influence, and it doesn't really matter if somebody will listen to my answer or not. It's just interesting for myself to think about these kind of matters.
Nice. Yep, makes a lot of sense. Now, in the notes that you shared, there is one other interesting topic that why I would be very much keen to discuss, that's related to, like, why do people do this just once a year? for 4 hours and then think that their job is done and everything is going to be fine after that. Do you want to intro us into your thinking and observations there?
I think that the problem is in definitions. That's why we have definition section in our episodes. Like we define terms before we get into the conversation. And one of the issues with definitions that I see within people I work with is that it's hard for them to define what's strategic and what is not. If I ask you, like, what's the most strategic decision you've made this year? You can probably think of something, but then you think of another decision and it's also kind of important. And then you remember the third decision where you were just an advisor to, and it was also kind of impactful to the entire team. And it's really hard to put them apart and say, like, all right, that's just tactical and that is strategic.
For sure.
And when people kind of nominate this day or 2 days or a number of hours, saying like, this is time for strategic things, it kind of brings their mindset to the thing like, all right, now we should move away everything. They basically give themselves a legal reason to stop thinking about tactical level and start choosing what's the most important. It's not always the proper choice. It's not always about strategy. It's sometimes about just things that hurt them the most or they're most emotionally attached to. So it's not always the right mindset or the proper mindset, but it's like a legalization. This is a time block that will be used for strategic issues. However, I define the strategic issues. And this is where definitions are the issue, because if you define strategic issues and your team defines strategic issues in a similar way, you may spend this time constructively. If everyone brings in their own vision and definitions of what's strategic, it might be a very bizarre conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's important indeed, that regardless of what we say about how we may disagree with the concept of doing this just once a year and so on and so forth, even if people do this once a year when they remove or throw away shackles of day-to-day minutiae and kind of start thinking about things a little bit more freely, that can all have a benefit of its own, right? Even if we may be the strategic purists would say that no, that's not the best way to do the strategic process and so on and so forth. Like even something is better than nothing. That's a good point.
Yeah, and then when you understand that that's like basically during this meeting, you've agreed about a number of important things and you can plan in advance time for monitoring. Like how often are we going to check up on these things? Monthly, quarterly, like how often are we going to talk if it's going the way we intended it to go? And if we schedule a retrospective on the entire strategizing process, like let's give us half a year and then come back and say what worked, what didn't work, what we should change next time. Like that's also part of the session, but it doesn't have to happen right in the same time slot, because many people, they try to bring the retrospective as the first initial stage of the strategic session, and that's where it gets really tough and crazy. And I think if they're like more gradually planned within a year, it brings the process of strategy development to a more sustainable and constant flow, which is amazing, but doesn't happen always.
I have like so many thoughts about this. I don't need to put them in some of my notes, but I think in general, it has also been my experience and conclusion from that experience that we oftentimes, when we turn point in time kind of things like event, if we turn event into a process that sort of happens, it gives freedom and efficiency that is not possible to achieve otherwise. Like if we, instead of saying, oh, like we need to decide everything and set everything in stone for the next year in like by the end of tomorrow, that puts so much pressure and so much constraint on the things that it stops being helpful. But if instead it decides, you say that like we are going to decide these things we set them in stone for, let's say, next 3 months. The general direction is here, and then we will meet in 3 months to do basically roughly the same thing over and over again. It means that you can make, to me, that would result in better decisions, because you would know that, oh, you can change or adjust things in short amount of time, instead of trying to get everything perfect in one go. And in my experience, that applies to so many different things on very different scales, from company strategy planning to project planning and execution and so on.
Yeah. And actually, like the way you mentioned, planning and execution are usually considered as just like basically two sections of one line. Like you do planning and then you do executions for quite a while, but then you do replanning. It's basically not a line, it's a circle. And you do planning and then you execute and then you plan again and reschedule, reconsider, calibrate your plans and get back to execution. And this cycle could be very fast. Calibrate your goals and plans on a monthly basis. If it makes sense, of course. If it's just a emotional hint, like I don't feel like doing that, that is an issue. But if something is not working, like how long are we going to push forward?
Then why do you think people prefer those 2-3 days intense sessions over spending time regularly on something like this?
I think my guess would be the environment. I think we had this conversation that it's kind of easier to set up your routines differently when you move somewhere, like when you travel,
Right.
than when you're just at home. Like home has a specific setup that you wake up, you eat specific things, you do sports in a specific way, and you can change some things, but it's really hard to change, like to spend entire differently your day at home. And I think the same thing here. Like there is a number of routines and process that just drag you and get you back. And if it's just a regular process that happens 4 hours and you come to the same meeting room where you solve some tactical issues, just the entire meeting room reminds you of some things that you have to do in a few hours and the next meeting that you are going to have tomorrow and the conversation you had there about some issues 2 hours ago. Like these things, they just keep popping up. And this full immersive session gives you a chance just to run away from all these habits and cliches that you have and try to be a bit more creative. So in my understanding, it's like a vacation versus routine thing where you take a retreat to change the scenery, to change the environment, not to think the way you think, because strategic thinking is more about mentality than about the agenda. And to change your mindset I think it is way easier in a new spot, new place, something motivating, something that doesn't bring a lot of old experience and habits on board.
Yeah, it's like as if you need to break out from the kind of day-to-day routine to acquire different view on things, which is difficult if you're doing this in the same kind of location where you're doing other things. So like psychology plays a role in that. But then like the question would be like maybe $1 billion question here could be like how do we combine like best of both worlds, where we know that in order to be effective at strategic thinking, you need to break away from day-to-day routines, and that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, it seems like we both are saying it would be beneficial to do that regularly rather than once a year. How do we combine the two? How could we take the best of both worlds? Is it like do off-site quarterly planning review sessions or
Why not?
something?
Why not? Like a collaboration session on quarterly basis, a planning session once a year, a retrospective 6 months after you've completed part of the strategy to see how it went. But I think the most important thing is a space to talk about just these issues, like having the I don't know, kind of meeting or a specific meeting room or I don't know, a wallpaper in your video messenger that kind of blocks out everything else and works as a focus mode. People don't use focus modes very much on their phones, and I think that's a big issue because they could benefit a lot from this thing if they could just switch from their regular mode into the focus mode for some time. and intentionally choose what they're going to do there for this time and then go back to the routines, this intention itself is useful. So if you get a monthly meeting for 2 hours to speak about strategic issues, it's nothing serious. Like you had this strategic session, but then just once a month for 2 hours, you can time block this time. You can switch off all the screens. Like how many screens do you have on your desk?
12.
Like you shut down 11 of those and can, for these 2 hours, just look at the faces of people you talk to and one shared screen that people would like to show something and spend these hours discussing things that you agreed to be important. I think it could work, but it requires some habits, and discipline and maybe preparation. I'm sorry.
And I would even say some sort of leadership as well, because that's about giving yourself and the people you're working with sort of permission to get out of the daily things, break away from maybe fires that are burning there, and say, no, like we take this time to think about where we want to go, how we can get there, and so on and so forth, and then take the conclusions or decisions we made in that space. We take them and we see how we can leverage them in our day-to-day activities to hopefully make this a better world for everyone.
I would also kind of mirror that to the fact that people could actually ask for that time, and most likely they will get an approval. They just sometimes can't articulate what they need, like how much they need and when they need for that. Whenever my teammates come and say, like, I would like to take a few days off to rest and then a day, like a business day, to consider what are the most important things for the next period, or like to prepare for a strategic session, or to make a deep dive into our customers' experience, like give up all the routines and just talk to the clients for a few days. Well, yes, please do that and share with everyone that you did that, so people would know that it's an actual thing. Like people do such kind of things.
Do you think the takeaway from our today's conversation for people could be give yourself a permission to do what you think is right?
Give or ask for permission, depending on where you are and what your role is.
What about ask for forgiveness? No.
Yeah, or ask for forgiveness. Why not?
So give yourself a permission and then, if need be, ask for forgiveness.
That sounds right. But I think that if people, after listening to this episode, can just ask themselves a question, what's strategic in their work and what's not, that would by itself be useful. If they can find some space and time to think about it, that would be way more useful than just having the definitions. And if they can talk to people they work with about this kind of conversation, for instance, they listen to this episode, they share it with people they would like to talk to, and then they come and discuss how it would work for them. What's the routine, the strategizing routine that would be a fit for their culture? That would be perfect, which probably will never happen, but I had to say it.
No, we that should not stop us, right? We should strive for perfection or better world no matter what. No, I think that's great. Like 3-layer framework. Ask yourself, give yourself space and time to answer those questions, and then on the next level, involve other people in the same level of discussion. Sounds great.
I think as good business consultant, I should make some kind of circles, like a smaller circle, then a bigger circle, then the biggest circle. I won't. Sorry, not this time.
So I almost thought that we are forming a venture about the pentacirculagon of strategy and something. Now, what about giving yourself a permission and space to think and dream and do something?
Well, excuse me, but no.
But nonetheless, I think people should stick to this advice of breaking out of routine and asking themselves what's strategic and what they're doing.
I just realized that our themes conversation in the very beginning and the entire topic are not that different, because basically that's what we use themes for, to just choose something that will be important for a specific period of time and find a way and space to focus on it. In our case, could be journals or podcasts or something else.
Like you said, all things come in circles.
Should be a t-shirt.
Well, that's an idea for another venture.
Please no. It's the fall of Nucleus, so no new ventures.
No. Okay, that's good enough. No new ventures, so the venture is the same. We are going to see our listeners. See our listeners. Is it the right way to say it?
We are not going to see our listeners anyway. We're going to talk to our listeners.
Hopefully. So, like, yeah, drop us a note about how you do strategic stuff and maybe what thoughts you had after listening to our conversation. And other than that, we'll see you, hear you, get in touch with you in 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, hopefully good weeks.
Yep, good weeks.